Welcome. Tonight I'll tell you a quiet story about a man, a song, and a strange museum tucked between the moments we tend to forget. It's a gentle tale, slow, atmospheric, and full of soft echoes. So find a comfortable position, allow your mind to loosen its grip on the day, and let the story carry you somewhere still and safe. Let us begin. The Ledger of Lullabies. Eli let the TV run until the colors all bled into the same gray. Some show he'd never watched before, played on mute, actors' mouths opening and closing soundlessly while the canned laughter light on the cable box flickered in the corner of his vision. He lay sideways on the futon, one arm under his head, phone balanced on his chest, thumb working on autopilot. Scroll, a stranger's brunch. Scroll, a dog video with the volume off. Scroll, Rin's name. Her text was from 3 hours ago. Got the Saturday slot at Floodlight. They want the older stuff on the set list. You ever going to listen to that demo or just pretend it never happened? Below that, an older message he hadn't answered either, sending you the link. Last chance to feel smug about calling that bridge. The link was there, blue and unopened. His thumb hovered, then darted away like it had brushed a hot stove. He scrolled instead, letting the words slide upward, out of sight. Up next was her latest photo, base slung low, eyes down, a curtain of newly dyed copper hair hiding her expression. The caption read, simply, Floodlight, 11 p.m., no guests list, pay your $5 like the rest of us. His out-of-tune guitar leaned in the corner, staring at him. He could almost hear it. Or maybe that was the apartment, the low buzz of the fridge compressor, the radiator ticking in an irregular pattern, the muted traffic outside fuzzing into white noise. If he closed his eyes, he could stack those sounds into something like a chord. You could write over this, a younger part of him said. You used to hear songs and shit like this. He shifted his gaze to the guitar and kept it there. The chipped black finish, the missing tone knob, the E string he still hadn't bothered to replace after it snapped months ago. He imagined getting up, crossing the room, tightening each tuning peg until the note settled into place. He imagined his fingers on the fretboard, the ache that came after too long disuse, the first clean chord ringing out. He didn't move. Instead, he went back to the breakup like it was a favorite old movie he could run through frame by frame. Rin's rehearsal space above the laundromat, hot air and detergent steam leaking under the door. Their drummer, Kiko, spinning a stick between her fingers and not looking at him while Rin paced with her bass strap twisted in her fists. If you're going to bail, just say you're bailing, Rin had said. Don't do the thing where you make it about some higher artistic purpose. He'd said something about needing space, about not wanting to drag them down, about how the songs weren't there yet, all of it technically true, none of it the truth. The truth was that the possibility of failing honestly scared him more than fading out quietly. You're good, Eli, Rin had said then, voice low and furious. The way she'd looked at him when she said it, that was the part he couldn't stop replaying. His phone screen dimmed. The room pressed in. The guitar, the futon, the thin walls, the neighbor's TV bleeding muffled audience applause through the plaster. This was what he'd chosen instead. The alarm for his shift went off at 11:15, a stock chime that sounded too bright for the hour. Congratulations, he muttered to himself, swinging his legs off the futon. The office building downtown was the kind of anonymous glass mid-rise people walked past without ever really seeing. After midnight, the lobby lights took on a greenish cast. The potted plants glossier, more artificial, like they'd been swapped out for plastic. Eli's ID badge beeped at the turnstile. He shrugged his janitor's cart out of the custodial closet, its wheels squeaking a half step off each other. He fell into the routine his body knew better than his mind did by now. Empty bins, replace liners, wipe down desks no one sat at after 6. In the call center on 11, the hum of servers came through the floor like a held organ note. The vending machine in the break room clicked and whirred every 7 seconds, just enough to set up a rhythm he couldn't quite ignore. He found patterns everywhere, the hiss of the air vents overlaid by the distant wail of a siren, resolving into a dissonant interval that wanted to resolve but never did. The squeak of his cart adding a syncopation. Once, months ago, he'd actually stopped and beat out the rhythm on the rim of a trash can, fingers moving before his brain could interfere. He'd snatched his hands back like he'd been caught. Now, when the urge rose, he smothered it. He focused on the mundane, the satisfying swipe of the rag across a fingerprint-smudged glass door, the chemical tang of cleaner, the way his own reflection warped in black monitor screens as he moved from cubicle to cubicle, a ghost in a navy work shirt. By 4, his feet ached. He signed the timesheet, nodded to the security guard half asleep at the desk, and stepped back into the night. The city air tasted like damp asphalt and old smoke. The streets near the financial district were mostly empty, traffic a distant whoosh. Somewhere far off, a train horn pulled a low, lonely line across the dark. Under it, something else hummed. At first he thought it was in his head, leftover server noise clinging to his ears. But when he paused at the corner, the sound swelled, a thread of tone weaving through the hiss of tires and far-off bass from a bar that hadn't closed yet. It wasn't a note he could name, too shifting for that, but it loitered near a pitch he recognized from somewhere deep, a place below language. He found himself turning left instead of right. Block by block, the city thinned out. Office towers gave way to older brick buildings, with blacked-out windows and tags bleeding down their sides. He passed a shuttered music store, with sun-faded posters in the window. Guitars bought and sold, hand-painted on the glass, CAOC, sign crooked. The hum tugged at him, like static under his skin. He remembered then, standing outside this same storefront with his mother when he was maybe 7. Mara in her threadbare teal jacket, coffee in one hand, his small fingers clamped around the other. He hadn't understood what she meant. Later he'd assumed it was a joke, another one of her weird, half-whimsical remarks that never went anywhere. Now the memory surfaced so sharply it made his throat burn. He drifted past the store, feet following the hum. It drew him down a narrow side street he didn't remember ever taking, past overflowing dumpsters and a mural of a woman with headphones for eyes. The street dead-ended into a service alley slick with some unidentifiable liquid, smelling of wet pavement, stale beer, and something faintly metallic. A single street lamp flickered overhead, strobing the world in slow, arrhythmic flashes. The hum was louder here, not louder, closer, like he'd stepped into its chest. Eli's breath clouded in front of him, even though the night wasn't that cold. The alley felt cut off from the rest of the city, edges fuzzed, the sound of distant cars damped down as if by heavy curtains. He turned in a slow circle, brick wall to his left, blank concrete to his right, the back of the music store ahead, a solid expanse of wall between 2 dented dumpsters, streaked with old rain. "Nope," he said aloud, to hear how his voice sounded, thin. The hum answered, a slight rise in pitch. He stepped closer to the wall. Up close, the concrete wasn't as smooth as it looked from a distance. Tiny cracks spidered across it. Someone had scraped initials in a corner years ago. The letters had worn down to meaningless grooves. His palm tingled. "Okay," he whispered. He lifted his hand anyway, and pressed his fingers flat to the cold surface. The vibration met him like an exhale. It thrummed through his skin, up his arm, into the thin bones of his wrist. For half a second he thought it was his pulse misfiring, but then he realized the rhythm didn't match his heartbeat. It was slower, deeper, aligning with something else in him. A familiar shiver started in his chest, the one that used to mean a song was coming whether he wanted it to or not. Images jumped in the dark behind his eyes. Mara standing at a window listening to trains, humming under her breath. Rin at 16, tapping her foot to a riff he'd nearly finished. An unplayed show, a crowd that might have been. He thought, without meaning to, of the exact moment he'd told Rin he was done. The taste of metal in his mouth, the way her face drained of color. The slam of the door behind him, stairwell air hot and sour with detergent and sweat. The hum surged, like something satisfied, or like a lock turning. Light traced itself along the wall beneath his palm. Not light, exactly an outline, like the afterimage you saw when you stared at a bright screen too long, and then looked away. A rectangle shimmered into being, edges wobbly, surface still apparently solid but vibrating as if something on the other side was trying to breathe through. He squinted. The door, that was the only word his mind could find, had no handle, no hinges, no keyhole, just a shift in the air, a feeling of thickness where there had been empty space. He lifted his hand. The outline wavered. "Stay," he said hoarsely, and laid his palm back. The concrete under his skin softened, or his perception of it did. Either way, the surface gave, the way old wood sometimes sighed when you leaned against it. He felt, distinctly, the sense of being regarded from the other side. You could walk away, the reasonable part of him said. Go home. Answer Rin's texts. Pretend you never heard anything. Instead, he pressed forward. The wall yielded like a curtain of cold water. For one disorienting second, he was nowhere, nothing. Only the hum thick around him, layered now with hundreds, maybe thousands of other tones, all braided into a huge, suspended chord. Then he stepped out onto marble. The atrium of echoes rose around him. It was a hall without a ceiling, or there was a ceiling, but it vanished into darkness that swallowed his gaze. Dim light came from nowhere obvious, washing everything in a soft, pearly glow. All around him, hovering at different heights, were glass cases of varying sizes, each holding a slowly swirling mote of light. Every case hummed, not in unison, each tone distinct, 1,000 almost songs hanging unsung in the air. His ears should have been overwhelmed, but the acoustics did something strange. Every sound stretched out and folded back on itself, so that his own tentative footsteps sounded like they were walking across a piano's sustain pedal. He turned full circle, heart hammering. Nearest him, a plaque floated in front of a small case containing a pale blue glow. The plaque's text shimmered in letters that seemed carved out of shadow, would have been composed by a nervous teenager in a bathroom stall before a talent show. Never sung, never forgotten. Eli read it twice, breath shallow. The voice came from his left, dry as dust and edged with a wheeze. He jerked around. A man in a battered navy jacket stood a few yards away, hands tucked into his pockets. Early 60s maybe, with thinning grey hair and a face lined like folded paper. A keyring hung from his belt, but instead of keys it held a fan of mismatched guitar picks, some worn, translucent with use. "You're tracking mud," the man said mildly, nodding at Eli's shoes. "Try to keep it off the central tiles." Eli stared at him. "The museum," the man said. He squinted. "Mora, right?" Something in Eli jolted. "How do you—" "Jonas," because that name arrived with the recognition, as if it had been quietly slotted into place, snorted softly. "You're on the roster now." "Night shift. Roster," Eli repeated. His voice sounded small beneath the humming. Cleaning, mostly. Jonas scratched his cheek with the edge of a guitar pick. "Well, unless you make it dangerous." The question was so normal it knocked the breath out of him. "Break room's this way," Jonas said, already turning toward a nondescript door set in the far wall. It hadn't been there a moment ago, or maybe Eli just hadn't noticed it. I didn't apply for anything," Eli said, trailing after him because the alternative seemed to be standing there until the humming swallowed him. "You'd be surprised what people apply for," Jonas said over his shoulder. The staff corridor could have belonged to any office building. Off-white walls, scuffed baseboards, buzzing fluorescent tubes that made everyone look a little sick. A corkboard by the break room door held a scatter of notes. Shift swap? Call Jay about fillers pinned at angles that made Eli's eyes itch. The break room itself had a narrow table, 2 mismatched chairs, and a coffee machine whose carafe had a permanent brown ring at its base. A small window over the sink looked out onto a static grey nothingness, like an unplugged TV. Jonas shuffled to the machine. "Curator's office is down the hall. They'll explain the rules." Eli echoed. Jonas glanced at him, eyes unexpectedly kind. He filled a stained mug halfway and pushed it across the counter. "Drink. Helps anchor you." Eli wrapped his hands around the cup, the too hot ceramic a relief. "To yourself," Jonas said simply. Before Eli could respond, a soft chime threaded through the corridor, higher and clearer than the general hum outside. Jonas straightened a little, like a man hearing his name on a loudspeaker. "They're ready," he said. "End of the hall. Don't worry." The curator's office was larger than it had any right to be, given the blank stretch of wall it occupied from the outside. Tall shelves lined with folders and thin, unlabeled volumes climbed into shadow. A wide desk sat in the middle, its surface almost bare except for a single stack of papers, a pen, and a ring of slim metal rods that Eli first thought were keys. Then one of them chimed, just a faint bell-like ping, as the person behind the desk lifted their hand. The curator had an androgynous, precise face, features arranged as carefully as sheet music. Their hair was dark and close-cropped, their suit the kind of black that drank light. Their eyes seemed to change color as Eli stepped closer, picking up tones from the distant hum outside, brown with a wash of green, then gray, then something like the color of old tape. Eli Mora, they said. Their voice was measured, each word placed. I didn't. He stopped. Laughed once, a short, startled sound. A ghost of a smile moved at the corner of the curator's mouth. You came to the door. They gestured to the chair across from the desk. Eli sat, his knees not quite clearing the underside. As Jonas, no doubt, half explained, the curator said, "This is the Museum of Unplayed Songs. We maintain a collection of unrealized musical potential." Eli swallowed. Because unrealized potential is not inert, they said. Left unchecked, it accumulates and distorts. People drown in what-ifs. Whole histories tilt under the weight of what never happened. Their fingers brushed the ring of metal rods. Up close, Eli saw they were tuning forks, each engraved with a tiny sigil. One vibrated faintly, enough to blur the air around it. You are being hired, the curator continued, as night custodial staff. Compensation is, they glanced at the top page of the stack, adequate, if unremarkable. Your contract functions as an anchor. Memory erosions, Eli repeated, his throat dry. Nothing dramatic, they said. You may occasionally forget where you placed your keys. A name might taste wrong in your mouth for a moment. The human brain misfiles information constantly. We add a little static. They slid the stack of papers toward him. Near the bottom, in smaller print, a paragraph read, "Employed understands that proximity to unrealized potential may result in minor cognitive reorganization. Employed accepts these terms." Eli flipped pages numbly. "Then you will leave through the door," the curator said, "and remember this as an unusually vivid dream about a job you did not take." A part of him wanted that, the out, clean and deniable. Another part, the part that had followed a hum down a dead-end alley in the middle of the night, stared at the papers and thought, if this is real, maybe there's finally an explanation for why my life feels off. He asked slowly. "Several," the curator said. "The most important, you will not touch the exhibits. You will not attempt to realize, perform, or otherwise incarnate any song housed here. How would I even—" Their gaze flicked to his hands, the calluses that had never quite gone away. Musicians are porous. Potential leaks. A brief pause. The last one left a dozen people unable to remember the faces of their own families. The songs were spectacular, I'm told. They said it evenly, but something tightened around the word cost, like a string pulled too hard. "Don't worry," the curator added. "We learn from catastrophe. That is why your duties are circumscribed and why Jonas is here." Eli's fingers curled around the pen without him deciding to pick it up. He asked, I walked away from this." The curator's eyes did that color shift again, catching a low, aching note from somewhere outside. "You abandoned several songs," they said. He signed. The lullaby wing was different from the atrium. Jonas walked him there with the loose-limbed amble of someone who'd traversed these halls 1,000 times. They passed through a narrower corridor where the cases were smaller, the light softer. The air felt marginally warmer, like someone had turned the thermostat up a degree only in this section. "You'll start here," Jonas said. "Less volatile content. Dusting, mopping, collecting any physical debris. Do not, under any circumstances, open a case. Don't lean on them." Eli asked. "In some wings," Jonas said. He left Eli at the threshold with a mop and a cart, and the faint smell of lemon cleaner. Alone, Eli stepped inside. The cases here hovered lower, at about chest height, and glowed in shades of cream and gold. The hum in this wing was gentler, a collection of barely there melodies that made his eyelids heavy. Each plaque bore words like, "would have been sung," or "might have soothed." He moved down the aisle slowly, pushing the cart, eyes catching on fragments. Would have been murmured to a colicky infant by a mother who never got the chance. Might have been written by a father on his only night off, if tiredness had not won. Somewhere deeper in the wing, a particular tone pierced him. It was soft and wordless, built on a simple falling figure. He knew it before he could name why, felt his chest clench around it the way a muscle spasms around an old injury. His feet moved faster, the wheels of the cart rattling over a seam in the floor. The case that held it was unremarkable, standard size, glass clear and flawless. Inside, the light swirled slow and teal-tinged, like water catching the reflection of an old jacket. The hum coming off it was barely audible, but his bones vibrated with it. Eli's hand went to the glass before he could stop himself. His fingertips met cool smoothness, static, pricking his skin. The melody unfurled in his head in full then, no longer muffled by distance or glass. A descending line, 3 notes, then a small, hopeful turn. The exact wordless lullaby Mara used to hum when the trains went by their apartment at night, the cars clacking over rails like a heartbeat. He'd fallen asleep to this sound so many times that his body still relaxed when he heard passing trains, even years after she was gone. The plaque floated at eye level. His gaze jerked to it. Would have been composed by a woman who grew up fearing the dark. Would have been hummed to a frightened child when trains passed outside a 4th-floor window. Would have stayed here, unplayed if she had not stolen it and vanished to pay its price. His throat closed. He read it again, fingers still against the glass. The letters did not change. Stolen it, he whispered. Mara's teal jacket. Mara's cheap spiral notebooks half filled with false starts. Mara standing at the window, breath warm against his hair, humming this melody like it was the only thing keeping the night back. "Don't touch the exhibits," a voice said from the doorway. He jerked his hand away as if burned. The curator stood at the end of the aisle, their expression unreadable. Jonas hovered behind them, gaze fixed somewhere over Eli's shoulder, as if he wished he were anywhere else. "That plaque," Eli said. His voice sounded wrong in his own ears. "That's... how does it know?" "The plaques record conditional biographies," the curator said. "They describe what would have been, what nearly was, what almost happened." Their gaze flicked briefly to the case. He stared at them. "I am saying," the curator replied, "that a woman whose life aligns exquisitely with the details of Mara Mora's file once worked in this institution." Eli's heart hammered high in his chest, too close to his throat. "Why?" The curator's eyes darkened, catching some lower, more ominous note from the humming around them. "Songs like this do not leave without taking something," they said. "When you free unrealized potential, the world adjusts its ledger. Something of equal weight is erased or altered. Memory, object, relationship, opportunity. The pattern chooses." Eli shook his head as if he could dislodge the words. She just left. No note, no explanation. "For you," the curator said quietly, or so she believed. Something in the way they said it suggested old arguments, lines drawn and redrawn. Heat rose behind Eli's eyes. A small pause. He took a step toward them. "You're going to tell me everything." Jonas shifted his weight, the guitar picks on his belt clinking softly. The curator regarded Eli for a long moment. The humming in the wings seemed to lean closer around them, as if listening. "There are limits to what we can tell you," they said at last. They moved into the aisle, stopping a respectful distance from the Lullaby's case. Even they didn't touch it. "Some songs will always seek escape," they said. "We exist to contain most of them. Occasionally, when containment fails, we manage the aftermath. Your mother's theft was one such failure." Their gaze met his, level. "We are prepared to offer you a controlled bargain, Eli Mora. Access to this lullaby's resonance, a chance to follow its trail, to understand what your mother believed she was buying. In exchange, you will accept the principle that every song freed exacts a cost, somewhere." The words fell into him like stones.
"So if I take it?"
His mouth was dry. "If I use it to find her."
"Something always disappears,"
the curator said. He thought of his apartment, his guitar, Rin's unopened demo link, of Mara's humming in the dark, the space in his life shaped like her absence. He asked, voice barely above a whisper,
Then you will clean this wing.
The curator said.
You will avoid this case as much as you can. You will live with questions that itch at the back of your skull every time you hear a train.
The lullaby's hum brushed against his ribs like a hand from the inside. The curator's tuning forks gave the faintest trembling ring, as if struck by a sound too soft to hear.
Then you will sign an addendum to your contract,
they said,
acknowledging deliberate interference.
surrendering certain protections. Jonas made a small, warning noise. The curator didn't look at him. Eli stared at the swirling teal light in the case. At the plaque that insisted this song had never been Mara's to begin with, even as it defined her by it, he had spent years orbiting the same questions, too afraid to move closer in case they burned him. Now the heat was here, within reach. His hand shook as he took the pen the curator offered. "Fine," he said, surprised at the steadiness of his own voice. "I'll sign." A corner of the curator's mouth lifted. Not quite approval, not quite pity. "Caution," they said softly. He signed the addendum, ink scratching loud in the hush. The second week, the hum under Eli's skin stopped feeling like a dream and settled into something worse, a habit. He mopped anonymous carpeted hallways, emptied wastebaskets, wiped fingerprints from office glass. The building's night noises, the air vent's soft rush, the vending machine's thunk and whir, the distant siren dopplering past 11 floors below, pressed against him like a song trying to form. He refused it, the way he always had, shoulders hunched, headphones in with no music playing, pretending the patterns were just patterns. On his break, he scrolled his phone. Rin's last text from days ago hovered near the top of the thread. "You ever gonna listen to that demo, or are you committed to pretending we never made anything good?" He hadn't answered. He told himself it was because he worked nights now, because he was tired. Really, it was because the idea of hearing his 19-year-old self trying mattered more than the sound could. The file was Schrödinger's proof of talent. Play it and maybe it was bad. Leave it closed and it could still be the thing that proved he'd almost been great. He shoved the phone back in his pocket and finished his shift in a blur. When he stepped out into the late early city, the sky just thinking about paling, exhaustion sat in his bones like damp. He should have gone home. Instead, his feet carried him down the now familiar route, past the shuttered music store with its sun-faded guitars bought and sold sign, through the narrow side street, into the dead-end service alley. The mural woman with headphones for eyes watched him. The single street lamp flickered its nervous Morse code. The wall hummed beneath his palm before he even pressed it. Inside, the atrium of echoes greeted him with its layered chord of almost songs. Glass cases hovered at their slow, patient heights. The pearly ambient light was the same, but something felt sharper, like static building before a storm. He was early for his shift. Jonas had told him staff could come in a little before or after, so long as they clocked the same hours. The contract anchored him. The museum apparently didn't care how he twisted around it. He drifted through the atrium, mop and cart abandoned near the door. Cases pulsed as he passed. Some hummed low, some bright. Each plaque murmured conditional tenses from the corner of his vision. It would have been easy, he thought, to spend a life wandering these halls, listening to things that never were. Safer than trying to make anything himself. The thought tasted sour. "You're loitering," Jonas said behind him. Eli jolted. The night guard leaned on his mop like a cane, battered navy jacket zipped halfway, coffee steam wreathing his face. His keyring of guitar picks clicked when he shifted his weight. "Just getting my bearings," Eli said. Jonas eyed him. Jonas took a sip of coffee. "Come on, break room." In the fluorescent hum of the staff corridor, Eli followed Jonas into the cramped break room. The coffee machine gurgled, complaining. The window looked out onto its familiar static grey nothing. Jonas handed him a paper cup without asking. The coffee tasted like burned anxiety. "You been thinking about your mum's lullaby?" Jonas said. Eli's throat tightened. "You people," Jonas repeated, amused. "I'm hourly." The ring at his belt chimed as he shifted. Eli found himself watching the picks, how worn their edges were. "Okay," Jonas said. Eli stared into his coffee. The curator talked about costs like they were hypothetical. But that plaque in the lullaby wing changed. When Mara stole the song, He swallowed. Jonas made a face. I signed the addendum, Eli said, quieter. Jonas's gaze went distant, like he was listening to a far-off radio station. Freeing a song means something else disappears, he said at last. Memory, object, sometimes a whole fork in someone's life. Ledger balancing. Staff contracts keep the edges blurry if you stay out of trouble. Has anyone here? Eli began. Jonas cut him off with a small shake of his head. Stories, files. You read enough plaques, you pick up patterns, Eli asked. Jonas laughed once, a gentle wheeze. Eli set his cup down with more force than he meant to, but Mara did. Jonas watched him for a long beat. I'm thinking, Eli said, heart thudding. If I just walk up to that lullaby and crack it open, I could wipe out everything you still are, Jonas finished. He sighed. You want to test the system. Eli looked up. Jonas rubbed his temple. Sometimes cases mislock, hairline cracks. A grim smile ghosted his mouth. In a quiet corner of the atrium there's a little one. Teenage garage band anthem. Eli's chest tugged. Jonas's fingers worried one of the picks on his ring. You want a test balloon, that's it. You pick that lock, you'll feel the cost. I don't know how to pick a song lock, Eli said. Jonas exhaled like he'd been holding this breath for years. I do, he said. They chose a corner of the atrium tucked behind a column, where the hum thinned enough that individual cases' tones separated like strands. The case Jonas had mentioned was half shoulder height, its swirling light the soft, adolescent orange of amplifiers in garages. The plaque read, would have been composed by Ruler Spinoza and friends, would have been played once in a school gym with bad acoustics, would have given 3 people their first real dance. Eli asked. You'd be surprised what people hang whole lives on, Jonas said. He unclipped his keyring of picks. They were all different, tortoiseshell, faded neon, a clear one with a crack through its center. He chose a dull blue triangle, its logo worn off. Procedure's simple, Jonas said. Stupid, but simple. Tap the glass in a rhythm close to the song's would-have-been heartbeat, but off by just enough to annoy it. Potential hates disharmony. He placed his fingertips lightly on the glass. You listen. He tapped 3 quick, 2 slow, 3 quick. The hum inside the case shivered, brightening, then dipping. Now you, he said. Eli swallowed. Jonas's mouth flattened. Raoul's 48 now. Went into HVAC. You knees are bad. Plaques update, Jonas said. Trust me, from a man who lived between cases for decades. Eli lifted his hand. The glass was cool. The hum vibrated his palm. He knocked in the pattern Jonas had shown. 3 quick, 2 slow, 3 quick. His rhythm faltered on the last triplet, his pulse jumping. The light inside flared, irritated. Good, Jonas murmured. Now, hand flat. Think about every almost song you never wrote at 16. 16-year-old Eli in Rin's parents' garage, fingers stiff on borrowed frets. The notebook of half lyrics under his bed. The way his chest had ached with wanting to be loud and honest, and not knowing how. All of it rose like steam. He pressed his palm flat. The anthem hit him like a rush of static. It slid through the glass, through his skin, a spill of drum fills and chanted choruses, cheap distortion pedals and the smell of gym floor wax. For a heartbeat he was flooded with a song he'd never heard, but almost remembered, one that felt like someone else's nostalgia braided with his own. Then it was inside him, gone from the case. The glass dulled. The hum vanished. Eli staggered back. Jonas caught his elbow. Breathe, Jonas said. In the silence where the case's song had been, the rest of the atrium's chord shifted, infinitesimally sharp. A few nearby plaques flickered like bad screens, then steadied. Jonas asked. Eli did an internal inventory. His name, his address, Mara, Rin, the band, the fight, the addendum with its neat black letters. Everything was there. He stopped. Something in his chest felt scraped clean, a gap where a memory should have been. Like a photo taken off a wall, the rectangle of unfaded paint exposing itself. There was a show, he said slowly. Early on, first time we weren't terrible. The image blurred as he reached for it. Rin had green hair. Kiko dropped a stick in the bridge, and we recovered. and people actually cheered. It was proof. He tried to picture the stage lights, the chords, the faces. The more he pushed, the more it smeared. "I know it happened," he said. The words felt like walking on ice. Jonas's face softened. "That was mine," Eli said, raw. "We did," Jonas said gently. "You invited the cut." He tapped his own temple. The loss sat in Eli's chest like a hollow note, resonating with everything he'd ever doubted about himself. He left at dawn feeling wrong in his own skin. The city outside looked almost the same, but the colors felt half a shade off. Car alarms yelped in a key that irritated his teeth. An ad on a bus stop for a beer he was sure he'd seen before now carried a tagline he didn't recognize. By the time he climbed the stairs to his apartment, his head throbbed. Inside, something was missing. It took him a full minute to understand what. There was a blank space above his futon where a poster should have been, the cheap reprint from that early show. He remembered tacking it up. He remembered Rin rolling her eyes at the design, but the wall was bare, no tack holes, just slightly different paint sheen where he must have never touched it. On his desk, a milk crate of odds and ends looked thinner. He poured through it. No handwritten set list on lined notebook paper, the one he'd scrawled backstage that night. Just old bills and a stray capo. His phone buzzed, a text from Rin. "Are you alive?" He stared at the screen until his vision doubled. He opened the Files app out of instinct, finger hovering over the folder labeled Demos, MP3, WAV. There was nothing. He blinked, scrolled, searched. No results. Maybe I renamed it, he thought wildly. Maybe I moved it. But when he checked storage, there was no trace. No recently deleted, no metadata, just a single file of Rin's present and an empty space where his past should have lived. The scrape inside his chest widened. He dropped onto the futon. The freed GarageBand anthem fizzed at the edge of his hearing, ghost chords muttering. It wanted out of him, out into the world. He slept badly, and when he woke mid-afternoon, the phantom song pulled like a tide. By dusk, he was on a bus without quite deciding to be. The anthem's rhythm beat time with the engine. Every time he tried to hum it, it slid away, but it tugged his attention uptown toward the laundromat building. The air over the laundromat always smelled like warm detergent and hot metal. The stairwell up to the rehearsal rooms was still painted that institutional beige, scuffed by amp corners. He climbed, hand on the rail. Each step tightened the invisible wire between the ghost song and whatever waited. Outside their old door, he heard it. A band was playing. Drums, bass, two guitar. The melody that leaked under the door was eerie in its almostness. The same contour as the freed anthem, but the chorus landed on a different chord, as if the universe had forgotten its own line and improvised. He pushed the door open a crack. 4 kids barely out of high school thrashed inside. One in a threadbare Misfits tee sang into a dented mic. The bassist's dyed purple undercut flashed as she moved. The song climbed toward its chorus and toppled into it, half a step off what the thing inside Eli told him it wanted to be. "Sorry, we're booked," the drummer called without looking up. "Just listening," Eli said, but his voice got swallowed by the amps. They crashed to an ending. Laughter, a few self-conscious cheers. "That last one," Eli said before he could stop himself stepping inside. The singer shrugged. "We haven't named it yet." He wiped sweat from his forehead. "You a friend of Rin's?" The name dropped like a muted symbol. Eli asked. "Back room," the bassist said, jerking her chin toward the narrow hallway. "Tuning or judging us?" Of course she was. His pulse stuttered as he walked the corridor. The phantom anthem paced in his skull, every step on the warped floorboards sinking to a beat that didn't quite exist. Rin stood with her bass strapped on, hair a fresh streaked copper instead of the blue he half remembered, fingers walking up the fretboard. When she saw him, her hands stilled. "Wow," she said. He tried for a smile. Up close, she looked the same and older all at once. Stronger lines around her mouth, the set of someone who'd carried amps up too many stairs and kept going, she asked. Her voice was careful, like she'd wrapped it in paper. "I heard a song," he said. "New Kids tune," she said. She slung the bass off her shoulder. "So, night janitor, huh?" He swallowed. Her eyes skimmed his face. looking for something. The question hit the raw spot momentum had already carved out. He looked down at his hands. Fuzzy, she repeated. I remember us recording, he said. The memory wobbled as he reached for it. Your amp kept cutting out. Kiko was late. 6, she said automatically. Her mouth tightened. We never recorded that early, Eli. That's the point. That's why I sent you the demo, because it was literally the only solid thing we had. One file. He stared at her. The room tilted. No, he said, but quietly. There was another. From that bar near campus. He could feel his brain trying to unspool the specifics and finding only static. Rin shook her head once, sharp. You've built a whole mythology out of stuff that almost happened, and now you're misremembering the only reality we actually lived. I'm not... He broke off. How was he supposed to explain that some cosmic ledger had taken his one good night and eaten the proof? You ghosted the band, she said flatly. Her tone softened a hair. If you're gonna disappear, at least own it. Her words hurt in the way truth did, scraping old scabs. I'm trying to own something, he said. The admission tasted like failure. She folded her arms. He opened his mouth. The museum waited on his tongue. The atrium, the cases, Mara's teal glow. The freed anthem buzzing in the walls. Nothing came out. Forget it, he said instead, backing toward the door. Story of your life, she muttered. He left to the sound of the kids in the main room starting the almost anthem again, this time a little tighter. Back at the museum that night, the atrium's chord sounded fractionally wrong. A case nearby hummed a quarter tone under its plaque's description. One plaque Eli was sure had read, would have become a cult classic album, now said, would have been passed around between friends, then forgotten. He wiped a thumb across the glass. The words held. The curator stood at the balcony rail above, black suit a vertical line against the pearly dark. They descended the stairs with metronomic footsteps, the ring of tuning forks at their belt chiming softly. A single unwritten high school anthem escapes, they said, and already the catalogue compensates. Futures nudge, potentials reshuffle. Eli's mouth was dry. I lost a show, and a demo. The curator regarded him, eyes an indeterminate color, reflecting the hum. You interfered on purpose. One slim hand hovered near a tuning fork. Their gaze flicked to a plaque across the atrium. The text trembled, then settled, a word shifting from would have to might have. In a previous case, the curator went on, a musician took too many songs. People woke unable to recognize their own children. It didn't feel like just a scratch. The curator's silence answered more than words. Somewhere deep, the museum's hum surged and dipped. Do not mistake the personal sharpness of your loss for global significance, they said finally, softer. They gestured toward the far hall. Go, clean the lullaby wing, listen, consider whether Mara's choice was madness or devotion. Either way, know that every song you free from here on will not just rewrite your scrapbook. Alone in the warm, drowsy air of the lullaby wing, Eli stood again before Mara's case. The teal glow pulsed steadily. The hum of the lullaby wove over and under the faint ghost of the garage band anthem now lodged somewhere behind his ears. His father's empty chair at the kitchen table. His own out-of-tune guitar. Rin's face when he'd said the word fuzzy. He pressed his fingers lightly to the glass, not enough to invite anything, just enough to feel the vibration. I've already traded a piece of me, he whispered. The lullaby's note seemed to rise in answer. A question curled inside it. He leaned closer until his forehead almost touched the case, the hum filling his skull. If this was what a small theft did, he thought, what would happen when he finally pulled his mother's song all the way out? The idea didn't make him step back. It made him want to find out. The corridor ended in a wall that hadn't been there yesterday. Eli stood a few feet from the blank expanse of eggshell paint, mop bucket idling at his side, the wheels slowly squeaking in place. He was sure this spot used to open onto a short passage that bent left into the copy room. He could almost feel the remembered draft of cooler air, smell toner and dust. Now there was nothing. Just wall, seamless, as if the museum had never needed anything else. He lifted a hand and laid his fingertips against it. The surface felt like any office wall, faint grit under paint, the slightest give of drywall. But beneath that, a low tremor thrummed through his bones, as if the building were holding in a breath. He didn't like how familiar that feeling had become. Behind him, a cart rattled. Jonas's shuffle hitch of a gait, the soft wheeze of his breath. "Don't stare at it too long," Jonas said. Eli let his hand fall. Jonas stopped beside him. Navy jacket zipped the neck despite the stuffy air. He squinted at the wall. "Used to lead to records overflow. Or the copy room." Jonas snorted. "To a wall. Mop around it, Mora." Eli glanced at him. Jonas scratched at the thinning hair above his ear, eyes still on the wall. Places shifting more than usual. He thought of the corridor that now ended a dozen steps short of where it had last week. The plaque in the atrium whose subject name blurred every time he tried to focus on it. Letters swimming like ink dropped in water. "Yeah," Eli said. He didn't say, "It's my fault." He finished the corridor and the next. Motions automatic. Mop swaying through the puddled reflections of fluorescent lights. The hum of the museum was a constant under his thoughts, like blood in his ears. Tonight it had picked up a restless dissonance, a tight minor third pressed against the usual chord. By the time he reached the atrium of echoes, the sound opened around him like a throat clearing. The cases hovered at their usual varied heights, motes of light drifting in lazy eddies. But a thin band of exhibits along the far mezzanine seemed out of alignment, tilted a few degrees too far toward the floor. Their hums skated sharp, as if straining toward some unheard pitch. He set the mop bucket at the base of a column and watched one plaque in particular. The last time he'd been here, it had read, "Would have been coaxed by." He'd traced the name with his eyes, amused by how pompous it sounded for an unwritten prog rock suite. Now the name refused to settle. When he tried to read it, his vision fuzzed, like the word was a curse he wasn't allowed to keep. He blinked hard and stepped back. The museum did not appreciate staring contests. This was what one teenage garage band anthem had done. Or rather, what stealing it had done. In the break room, the stale coffee smelled burnt sweet. The corkboard carried 3 new notes about filter changes, and one about someone's lost scarf, written in 2 different hands that seemed to argue about the color. Eli wrapped his fingers around a chipped mug for the comfort of something solid and reeled. The steam rose in a wavering line, warping the grey static outside the window. He found the curator in their office, as if they'd been expecting his knock. They sat behind the desk, black suit immaculate, a tuning fork balanced delicately between thumb and forefinger. Their eyes, tonight, were a dusky, uncertain green, reflecting the low lamplight like deep water. "Mr. Mora," they said. The tuning fork chimed once, though they hadn't struck it against anything Eli could see. Eli took the chair opposite. The leather sighed under his weight. They set the fork down among a fan of folders. "The museum is adjusting," he hesitated. "The corridor that ends in a wall, the plaques that won't hold still. The atrium sounds wrong." A small shrug. "Normal enough. For this week?" He swallowed. The mug was too hot in his hands. He set it carefully on a coaster ringed with old coffee stains. "I need you to explain something," he said. "Not in riddles." The curator's gaze sharpened, tuning to a finer frequency. "I'm asking about the cost. You keep telling me not to touch things, not to steal. I've already—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "Freed. Not stole. The word the museum preferred. I tested it," he said instead. "With Jonas. One small song. And the world shifted anyway." Silence stretched, thick as the air in the resonance vault he had yet to see. "Our records are comprehensive," the curator said at last. His voice surprised him, how hard it came out, how little it wavered. They studied him, head tilted. Somewhere high above, a case thrummed in sympathetic vibration. The curator asked. He drew in a careful breath. The idea had been coiling in him for nights, knotting around the lullaby's remembered warmth. "You said," he began, "that some songs can be accessed without fully freeing them. Controlled bargains." The curator's expression did not change, but the temperature of the room seemed to drop a degree.
"You already have a tether to it by virtue of your inheritance,"
they said. You signed an addendum allowing resonance.
I want to see what she saw, he said.
To follow where she went.
I'm not asking to perform it on a stage or burn the place down. Just...
The words tasted like rust. Let me take it out. A little. See what it does. His own certainty startled him. The thought of sliding the song through glass and into his hands should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like admission, like finally turning to face something that had been standing in his doorway for years. The curator steepled their fingers.
You're asking for a controlled release of a Resonance Vault-class exhibit, Mr. Mora. Then supervise me, he said. You'll have your hooks in me the whole time. You said it yourself. I'm already porous.
A faint line appeared between their brows. Outside the office, a klaxon of discordant hum rose and subsided. They asked softly. He thought of the empty rectangle of wall above his futon where a cheap poster had once hung. Of the space on his phone where a file name should have been. Of Rin's blank confusion when he'd tried to bring up that first demo. The way her irritation had covered something like grief.
I don't get to decide that, he said.
Isn't that the point? The ledger chooses. You understand the rules, they said. He leaned forward. The curator's eyes darkened, almost black with sound. For a moment they looked very tired. Finish your rounds, they said, voice gone flat. Then meet me at the lower stairwell. The stairwell to the lower levels did not exist on any map Eli had seen. Even if it had, he would not have been able to recall its exact location after leaving. That was how the museum worked. But tonight, following the curator's measured steps, he found it behind a fire door labeled artillerized personnel only, opening onto stairs that fell away into slate-blue shadow. Every step down tightened the pressure in his skull. The hum shifted lower, out of the range of his ears, and into his bones. By the time the stairwell opened into a wide chamber, the air felt as dense as water. The resonance vault, the curator said. The cases here were fewer and farther apart, larger, their glass thickened by bands of something darker than metal. Their contents glowed faintly, like embers banked under ash. The sound was almost non-existent, a subsonic thrum that made his gut clench. Near the center of the room, one case shone brighter than the rest, a soft teal halo bleeding into the dim. He didn't need the plaque to know. You moved it, he said. His voice came out hoarse. The lullaby belonged here from the beginning, the curator replied. It was misfiled once, for reasons we have discussed. He stepped closer. Within the glass, the light swirled with more intention than any of the atrium motes, coiling and uncurling like something breathing. The familiar four-note descent shivered through him, even before he registered sound. His body recognized it the way his fingers remembered old chords. Mara's hum, pressed against his fevered forehead when trains wailed past their paper-thin windows. The rhythm of her thumb tapping his back. The smell of coffee and citrus. The scrape of her cheap spiral notebooks as she moved them off the couch to make room for him. He asked quietly. The curator answered by sliding a thin folder across a nearby stand. Its classification is not up for debate. He looked at the folder and then at them. A clause, they said. The existing addendum shields you from some collateral fraying. A controlled release like this will pierce more of that protection. The losses will be more targeted. His laugh came out short. They said nothing. His hand didn't shake as he signed. The pen moved across paper in clean strokes, his name splitting itself into legal letters. When he set it down, his pulse pounded in his ears, in his fingertips, in the hollow at the base of his throat. Place your hand on the glass, the curator said. Their tuning forks hung silent at their belt, as if even the tools were holding breath. He did. The surface was cold enough to hurt. Then it wasn't. Then there was no sense of surface at all, only a thin membrane of resistance like the skin of water, and beneath that, warmth rushing up to meet him. The lullaby slipped into him without sound, at first. An intake of air, an ache in his chest, the impression of teal light pouring through the tendons of his hand and traveling up his arm. By the time it reached his heart, the four notes had bloomed into something vast and intricate, wrapping around his pulse like vines around a fence post. He couldn't tell if he was hearing it in the vault or behind his ribs. The melody folded on itself, harmonies unfurling, threads he'd never known were there. Under it all, the remembered texture of his mother's breath, that tiny catch on the third note, the rasp on high exhale. Tears blurred his vision before he realized he was crying. When he finally managed to breathe, the vault had gone very still. The curator watched him with an expression that looked disturbingly like pity. "Contain it," they said softly. "Do not hum, do not whistle, do not attempt to play it on any instrument. You are a vessel only." He nodded, though the words skidded over the surface of his attention. The song was shifting already, testing the edges of him, tracing old neural paths like it had been here before. On the street, some time later, though his watch insisted less than an hour had passed, night clung to the city in a humid film. The museum door let him out into the dead-end alley as usual. The mural's headphones' eyes watched him without recognition. The hum of traffic, the hiss of a distant bus's brakes, the tinny spill of music from a passing car. All of it slid around the lullaby now lodged in his chest. It answered to none of them, or they answered to it. He walked. On the main road, the light changed and the impatient blare of a horn cut through the air in a staccato rhythm. Short, short, long, short. The lullaby twined around it, adjusting, as if sampling. When he turned down toward the train tracks, the reason became clear. The first train he heard that night wasn't visible yet. It was a low, growing roar, the rails ahead shivering in anticipation. Then the horn called out, a sequence of notes that had lived in the background of his childhood like weather. Only now he heard it as a phrase in the lullaby, or the other way around. The melody inside him leaned toward the sound like metal toward a magnet. He followed. Block by block, the city reordered itself according to the song's pull. He found himself turning down a residential street he hadn't walked in years, the cracks in the pavement familiarly misaligned, a grocery that had once been a video store. A laundromat with fogged windows, the thrum of machines syncing perfectly to the lullaby's tempo. By the time he reached the chipped teal railing of an old walk-up stairwell, his legs shook. He stared at the paint. It flaked under his thumb in a way he remembered intimately, like worry picked at during long waits for his mother to come home. She had carried him up these stairs once, twice, 100 times. The lullaby rose in his throat, begging to be let out. He swallowed hard until it settled, coarser than before, edged with something like urgency. Inside, he knew without knowing, there would be an apartment that had never quite been home, windows that had rattled when trains passed, a palette of chipped teal and nicotine beige and cheap notebook paper stacked on a table, and somewhere a first point of contact, a place where Mara Mora had heard the museum calling. His phone buzzed in his pocket. For a strange moment he expected to see her name, but the notification was from Rin, a message thread near the top, her last unanswered text about the old demo still pinned there like a torn-off label. He opened the music folder on reflex. The slot where the file should have been, where it had always been, his private proof, was a smooth blank. No missing file error, no grayed-out name, just absence. His stomach flipped. He scrolled again, slower, as if the act of looking might convince reality to reassemble around his insistence. Nothing. He toggled to messages. The thread with Rin pulsed with a new bubble. You alive or just ghosting harder than usual? Got notes on the mix if you still care. He stared. The words blurred. What demo? He typed, fingers clumsy. 3 dots appeared, vanished, reappeared. What are you talking about? She wrote. We never recorded that early stuff. You okay? The lullaby flared, a sympathetic ache. Something inside him lurched, a floorboard giving way. He leaned his forehead against the cool metal of the stairwell rail. The city hummed around him, reshuffled. Somewhere beneath the present, under layers of painted-over lives, a different version of him had just been torn out by the roots. Behind his ribs the song tightened, pulling not just toward this building but outward, along lines he could not yet map, toward pawn shops and bus stops and thrift stores, toward paper traces of a woman who had bargained with the same melody and run. Eli closed his eyes, listening as the lullaby began, finally, to point. He didn't know yet what it would take from him next, but with each note, each tug toward a half-remembered corner of the city, he understood with terrible clarity that there was no going back to the version of himself who had been content to let his life be a museum of almost songs. The lullaby had been loosed. Jonas stood in the junction like someone had moved his kitchen overnight. Eli came around the corner with his mop bucket, the wheels squeaking in that syncopated 3-beat he'd been unconsciously matching for the last 5 minutes. Jonas didn't turn. He just stared at a smooth stretch of off-white wall where a door should have been. "Don't tell me," Eli said. "Budget cuts." Jonas's hand floated out, stopped just short of touching the new plaster. "There was a door here," he said. "Listening room. Used to come off this junction." Jonas squinted, as if the answer was on the tip of his tongue and had just been erased. Records, old tape machines, headphones. Eli felt a pressure in his ears, the way he did on descending elevators. Jonas let his fingers rest against the wall. It gave off a faint inner vibration, like something humming behind drywall. He snatched his hand back. Jonas finally looked at him. The skin around his eyes was grayer than usual. Eli thought of the corridor in the atrium that felt 2 steps shorter every night, of a plaque whose letters had fuzzed when he'd tried to focus on the name. The museum was a body reacting to a fever. He was the infection. "Probably nothing," Jonas said. "Keep moving." But as Eli rolled his bucket away, the phantom outline of a door handle sat in his mind like a missing tooth. The deep archive smelled like paper left in a closed piano bench for decades, dust and wood and old ink. The curator led him down a narrow stair from the staff corridor, their steps perfectly even, the chime of their tuning fork ring muted but present. The deeper they went, the less the general museum hum reached them. The sound down here was thinner, more precise. The chamber opened suddenly. Rows of metal shelving under low, buzzing lights, each shelf stacked with plaques and thin ledgers in slipcases. It could have been an underfunded university records room if not for the way some plaques shimmered between fonts, as if the words were never quite committed. "Welcome to biography storage," the curator said. "I thought all the plaques stayed out there," Eli said. "They cycle. Active exhibits keep a copy in the galleries." The curator's eyes shifted color with the fluorescence gray, then a dilute green as some distant hum modulated. They guided him to a high shelf and slid out a ledger the size of a legal pad, teal cloth fraying at the edges. His breath stuttered. They placed it on a central table and opened it. Eli braced for the solid certainty of biography, something to nail his mother back into place. Instead, the pages flowed. On the first spread, neat black text declared, "Mara Mora would have lived a small life above the laundromat, writing half-finished songs and raising her son alone. Below, she would have played open mics, written a few local favorites, grown soft around the middle, never known about the museum." He blinked. The ink trembled. The words dissolved into a grey wash, then reformed. "Mara Mora would have left the city at 21, never having a child, touring as a backing vocalist for 3 forgettable bands." The letters held, then blurred again, shards of sentences cross-fading into one another. A dozen versions. No Eli, no teal stairwell, no lullaby. He reached for the edge of the page. "Possibles," the curator said softly. They flipped to the middle of the ledger. The pages resisted, thickening around their fingers. The text settled. Color crept into the font, a faint teal halo around the letters. Mara Mora worked nights at the Museum of Unplayed Songs. She learned the tongue of the hums. She found a lullaby that promised to quiet her own childhood fear and her son's. Underneath, line by line, the ledger unfurled. Her cleaning shifts, her quick promotion to assistant cataloguer, the long arguments with the curator in the atrium's shadows about fairness, about debt. How she pressed her palm to the case in the lullaby wing knowing something would be taken. How she came back to sign an addendum, her handwriting shaky. Eli asked. His throat was tight. The curator's finger slid down the page. Some sentences thinned out when he tried to read them, erased X to protect Y, but one section held firm. She negotiated a bargain. Her continuing presence in her son's life would be reclassified as the debt. By vanishing, she would satisfy the museum's claim upon him. His vision blurred. For once, there was no judgment in their tone, only weariness. We argued, I proposed staggered payments, shared custody of the debt, if you like. She refused, a ghost of a smile that didn't reach their eyes. The curator's hand closed over part of the page. For a second, the ink beneath their skin went utterly blank. I am a custodian. I enforce balance. Within those limits, I advise. Sacrifice sounded too noble. Eli wanted a word like mistake, like overreaction, like failure. His chest burned. The lullaby inside him, that soft, insistent presence, shifted key, a minor twist of grief. As the curator turned the pages, its melody braided with the words on the paper, little flares of harmony when certain lines appeared. On one page, a version of Mara who never came to the museum went soft and domestic, humming made-up tunes that never quite landed. On another, she died in a car accident when Eli was 4, no museum in sight. The lullaby in him shivered at those futures, notes bending as if in mourning. She loved you, the curator said quietly, fiercely, catastrophically. She saw only one chord progression ahead. If she stayed, the debt would fall on you. His voice came out harsh. They did not flinch. I warned her that removing herself would leave a wound in you that might one day produce its own dangerous songs. Eli pressed his palms flat on the table. The pages under his skin rippled, briefly showing lines he couldn't quite catch. Versions where he walked away from the alley that first night. Versions where he never picked up a guitar. The lullaby swelled in his ribs, a pressure that made his eyes sting. So this. He gestured at the ledger, the shelves, the whole humming basement.
This is what she thought was worth leaving for.
A bet on you choosing,
the curator said. It was too much and not enough, both at once. Rin's rehearsal space smelled like steam and detergent and stale hopes. Eli stood in the corridor outside, listening to the muffled thump of bass through the door. Someone counted in 1, 2, 3, 4, and a song started, tight and sharp. Not the freed high school anthem. Something new, something hers. He almost turned around. Instead, he knocked. The music cut off mid-bar. The door opened a crack. Rin peered out, hair now a washed-out plum, sweat darkening the collar of her t-shirt. Her eyes widened, then narrowed immediately. "Hi," he said, and heard how useless it sounded. Behind her, one of the kids from the other band, purple undercut bassist, pretended not to stare while coiling a cable. "I'm busy," Rin said. "I know. He swallowed. The museum weighed on his tongue, a concrete slab he couldn't lift. She stepped into the hallway, pulling the door mostly shut behind her. The noise inside dropped to a dull thrum. "You ghost me for, what, a year?" she said. "I'm not—" He stopped. He was in fact doing exactly that. "Something's wrong," he tried, "with our memories, with—" The word museum evaporated in his mouth, leaving only a taste of ozone. "Yeah," she snapped. "What's wrong is you walked. That's not—" He reached for the early bar show, the packed room, the rush of noise. It slid sideways, replaced by a flimsy substitute memory of a half-empty Tuesday night gig, the ledgers cut. Her laugh was sharp and humorless. "You always remember us bigger than we were. I used to think it was sweet." He flinched. The lullaby moved, a sympathetic ache. "I'm not hiding anymore," he said, surprising himself with how true it felt. "I'm following something, trying to understand why my mom left. There are costs." "There are costs," she echoed, air quoting. She shook her head, stepped back into the rehearsal room, looming. "Look, I don't care if it's therapy or religion or whatever weird guru YouTube channel you're on now." He felt heat rise in his face. "I walked because I was scared," he said. "Because I thought if I really tried it would prove I wasn't good enough. And because every time I looked at you on stage, all I could see was the version of us that didn't make it. I'm done pretending that was noble." Rin blinked. For a second, the hallway went very quiet, the rehearsal room's noise seeping around them like water under a door. "That's more honest than usual," she said slowly. "I'm also," he went on, words tumbling now, actively choosing something that might screw me up worse. "Because I need to know what she did, my mum, and why. It's not an excuse." She studied him, eyes flicking over his face like she was checking for tells. "And where does that leave the rest of us? Me? Kiko?" "I don't know," he said. The admission felt like a kind of relief. "I can't promise anything." Silence stretched. A washing machine somewhere below them kicked into a new cycle. its churn oddly in time with his heartbeat. Rin, exhale. You always did have a talent for making a mess sound poetic, she said. Here's the deal, since you're suddenly big on choices. Either you tell me the truth, whatever you can actually say, or you stay away. Really away. He opened his mouth. The museum sat behind his teeth like a locked cord, unplayable. He could talk about fear and regret, but not doors in alleys or humming glass cases. I can't tell you all of it, he said. At her look, he added. Not metaphorically. There are rules I broke and rules I can't break. But I can tell you this. I'm carrying something that's changing me, and it's going to cost me pieces of us. My memories of us. Maybe yours. Her jaw worked. For once, she seemed at a loss for words. She said at last, No, he said, that's the point. I don't want you to be. That's why I'm here. There it was again. If you're really choosing this whatever it is, then choose it. The words hurt because they were true. She held up a hand. If you come back again, it has to be with something real. A song you finished. A decision you didn't run from. Not apologies. Her gaze searched his face one last time. And if that never happens, that's fine too. She turned, hand on the doorknob. I am choosing, he said to her back. She paused, shoulders tight. Then go wreck it somewhere else, she said, and went inside. The latch clicked. The band struck up again, fierce and alive. Eli stood alone in the hallway until the song's edges blurred. The curator was waiting in the atrium when he came in next shift. The hum of the cases pitched a fraction sharper than before. Their suit looked more rumpled than he'd ever seen it, a faint indentation across their cheek where they must have fallen asleep on a ledger. Mr. Mora, they said. They led him not to the office, not to the deep archive, but to a smaller, windowless room off the staff corridor he'd never noticed, a kind of inner chapel lined with empty frames. On a pedestal in the center lay a single page, face down. The ledger is restless, the curator said. Their gaze flicked toward the atrium, where a case blinked off on off, like a struggling bulb. Eli's skin prickled. The lullaby inside him tightened, as if bracing. Their tone was flat, but a fine tremor ran through their fingers. There is still time to mitigate. If you return the lullaby to the vault now, much will stabilize. You will lose certain questions. You may gain others. Then we proceed toward unraveling. Memories slipping at scale. Cultural anchors going soft. Concerts that hundreds remember attending, but no one can prove happened. That's already happening, he said. He thought of the online threads about phantom venues, the arguments on buses over misremembered anthems. In part, the curator said. In part because this work was always precarious. You are not the only variable. They turned the page on the pedestal over. Eli stepped closer. It was a contract, but not like the ones he'd signed before. Fewer lines, no boilerplate about pay or mop schedules. One clause, underlined in a faint teal ink that looked suspiciously like the ledger's handwriting. By signing below, employee agrees to return exhibit Lullaby 3 to containment at once, ceding all claims to its resonance. In exchange, the museum will seal associated ledger pathways, preventing further large-scale adjustments. Below that, in smaller text, employee acknowledge that failure to sign will constitute an active choice to continue bearing exhibit Lullaby 3, accepting that losses may exceed personal history and extend to others. Neat, Eli said. It is not a trap, the curator said. They folded their hands. Return the lullaby and you keep much of what remains. Your sister? They stopped, eyes flickering as if they'd stepped onto an unseen, loose tile. I don't have a sister, Eli said slowly. Silence rang. The curator's face went very still. No, they said. You do not. Forgive me. The room seemed to tilt. The lullaby flared, then steadied, like a hand on his spine. Or, the curator went on, recovering their poise, you refuse. You continue to carry the exhibit. You demand answers. He asked. No way to walk a middle line? Their eyes met his. For the first time since he'd met them, he saw something like doubt. Until very recently, they said, I would have said no. The ledger deals in binaries, realized or unrealized, stored or freed. Their fingers brushed the tuning forks at their belt, which shivered faintly without being struck. Perhaps there is a sliver. It wasn't much, but it was more than the museum had ever offered Mara. "Then that's what I want," Eli said. The words came easy. "Not to stop the losses, that ship has sailed." The curator studied him for a long moment, as if listening to a distant, complex chord. "Very well," they said at last, a thin, almost invisible smile. "You will come to the vault on your next shift. Jonas will guide you past the safeguards he should not know how to circumvent. I will present alternatives. Like ordering from the world's worst menu," Eli said. "You asked for choice," the curator replied. They lifted the contract from the pedestal and held it out. "Until then, this remains." The page felt heavier than paper should when he took it. The lullaby hummed along his bones, low and insistent. Eli did not sign. He folded the contract once, twice, tucked it into his pocket like a pick before a gig, and met the curator's gaze. "I'll see you in the vault," he said. The curator inclined their head, something like reluctant respect in the gesture. As Eli stepped back into the atrium, the cases shivered. A few dimmed, others flared, as if the whole museum had inhaled at once, bracing for a note no one had ever tried to play. Inside his chest, the lullaby shifted, as though turning toward some deeper room, some final echo he had yet to hear. The atrium sounded wrong. Eli stepped out of the staff corridor and into the open space, mop bucket wheels rattling over marble. The hum that usually wrapped around him like a tired organ chord was jagged now, notes slipping past each other a fraction late. Some of the cases blinked, not on, not off, but stuttering, as if someone were flicking a cosmic light switch too fast. One case near the central stair went dark, then reappeared half a second later, its plaque rewriting mid-sentence. Eli watched the text crawl like a buffering video. Would have LED to A, would have sold, would have been hummed by and then settle, smaller, meaner, would have been written and forgotten. His stomach dipped. "That's new," he muttered. Across the hall, Jonas stood with his hands shoved deep into his navy jacket pockets, face more lined than usual. The guard squinted up at a case that was listing a few degrees to the left, like a painting hung crooked. "Feels like the whole place has a cold," Jonas said. His voice echoed back with a noticeable lag, their words reaching the far walls and returning seconds late, ghost conversation overlapping real speech. Eli turned in a slow circle. The atrium seemed slightly larger than last night, perspectives stretched, corners breathing in and out. A woman in a cleaning apron, the day shift mop ghosting through on some misaligned schedule, faded from one side passage as if she'd never been there. "Curator said it would get bad," Eli said. Jonas gave a short, humorless laugh that turned into a cough. He rubbed at his temple. Eli looked at him. Jonas frowned, like the act itself hurt. "Whole thing's gone. I remember the alley door then, shift 2. Like someone cut the first reel out. I know I needed the paycheck. I know that part. But..." He let the sentence trail off. The bucket wheels squeaked. The dissonant hum pressed against Eli's eardrums, then slipped inside, catching on the steady, secret pulse of the lullaby in his chest. The two sounds scraped together in him, a dissonance on top of a dissonance. "This is because of me," he said. Jonas didn't rush to disagree. He gestured upward with his chin. "Mara, you. That other mess years back." Nearby, a plaque flickered, then steadied on a new line. Would have sparked a small local scene. The words shivered and blurred when Eli tried to read the name beneath. He blinked and stepped back. In the far corner, a case's contents thinned to a wisp and vanished entirely. The humming around them dropped a half step, and then, for a moment, steadied. "Come on," Jonas said. "Break room." The break room's fluorescent light buzzed, faintly out of sync with itself, as if two different pasts were sharing the same fixtures. The ancient coffee machine shuddered and then spat out a thin, overbrewed trickle that smelled like scorched cardboard. Eli leaned against the table, paper cup warming his fingers. Through the static grey window, the nothing outside shimmered like an old TV losing its signal. Jonas sat opposite him, elbows braced on his knees, Walkman headphones resting around his neck, his guitar pick ring, dozens of mismatched plastic and metal pieces, clinked softly when he shifted. "You look like hell," Jonas said. Eli tried a sip of coffee and grimaced. Jonas nodded, gaze fixed on some invisible point on the wall. Eli said. Jonas shrugged, a tiny ghost of humor. He toyed with a blue pick, edges worn to a crescent. Eli waited. Jonas rarely volunteered anything about before. Jonas's eyes stayed on the pick. "We were idiots. Thought we'd be the next anyone. There's always a next anyone, right? Got an offer once, small label, enough to make us think it meant something." He let out air in a wheeze. Eli had seen the traces, the way Jonas listened, the way his fingers still tapped out invisible fills on his coffee cup. Jonas's voice thinned. "Ours. Big one. Or it would have been. I found its case down there." He flicked a glance toward the floor, meaning the vault years back, recognized the hum. He turned the pick over. "I almost did what you did. Almost cracked it. Then I saw a plaque next to it change while I stood there. Some girl who'd have heard it at the right moment and left a man who hit her." He swallowed. I put my hand down, walked away. Eli asked. Jonas finally looked up. His eyes were wet but steady. "You think doing nothing keeps you safe until you die?" The words lodged under Eli's sternum, right where the lullaby pulsed. "Curator's going to lock me down," Eli said. Jonas shook his head slowly. "They'll try to manage. That's what they do. But they're tired, kid. Ledger's tired. You opened a crack. A case somewhere beyond the wall popped like a distant light bulb. The hum shivered, then rose again." Jonas set his cup aside and stood. He tapped the guitar pick ring at his belt. Eli blinked. "They said next shift, with you." Jonas gave a small, lopsided smile that made him look briefly, impossibly, like someone in their 20s playing to a half-empty bar. They slipped out through the staff corridor while the curator was nowhere visible, their absence only a minor discord in the museum's attention. The authorized personnel-only door at the end of the hall loomed solid and unremarkable. Jonas pulled a dull bronze pick from his ring, its surface etched with tiny, half-worn grooves. He pressed it to the door jamb, then tapped 3 times in an uneven rhythm, like someone trying and failing to keep time with a slow song. The door shivered. Eli felt the whole hallway react. The hum thickened, then thinned around them, as if the building had just inhaled sharply. "You're not supposed to know how to do that," Eli said. Jonas pushed the door. It swung inward on darkness and a breath of air that smelled of slate and rain. They descended the narrow stairwell. Tonight the steps didn't quite match their feet. Once Eli's shoe landed on air for an instant where a riser should have been, and his gut lurched, as if a piece of his past had been quietly removed in the time it took to blink. Jonas grabbed his arm and steadied him. "Reality's having a growth spurt," Jonas said, breathing a little harder. At a landing that might not have existed on Eli's last trip, Jonas paused, bracing one hand against the wall. For a second his face crumpled, eyes squeezed shut. Eli asked. Jonas laughed softly, breathless. He shook his head, as if clearing water from his ears. "Ledger can take it." He patted Eli's shoulder, almost fatherly. The air grew heavier as they neared the resonance vault. The subsonic thrum crawled up through Eli's legs and into his chest, twining with the lullaby. It answered, brightening, a small light turning its face toward a much larger sun. When Jonas pushed the final door, the vault opened like a throat. The reinforced cases stood in dim rows, their contents burning ember bright. The sound here wasn't quite hearing. It was pressure, insistence, the sense of hundreds of songs leaning against their glass. The curator was waiting. They stood in the center aisle, black suit a sharp cut against the vault's muted glow. Their ring of tuning forks hung heavier than usual at their hip, each metal tine vibrating silently, catching light. "You're early," they said. Their voice didn't echo at all. The vault drank sound greedily. Jonas stepped in front of Eli. Not quite a shield, but close. He was coming down here anyway. The curator's eyes flicked to the bronze pick still in Jonas's hand. The fork nearest their thumb trembled with a sharp, dissonant chime only Eli seemed to hear. "Safeguards aren't safeguarding much," Jonas replied. The curator closed their eyes for a fractional second. Eli could see the listening, a micro-flinch as they tuned themselves to the museum's failing chord. "We are at a threshold," they said quietly. "Neither did mine," Eli said. His voice came out rough in the dense air. The curator's gaze settled on him. Their irises were a color that couldn't decide between gray and green, shifting with the vault's sound. "Yes," they said. They gestured, and the humming underfoot changed. Eli felt it in his bones, 3 pulses resolving into distinct patterns, like time signatures laid over each other. 3 paths. The curator's tuning forks chimed in response, each a different pitch. "You already know the first," they said. "Return the lullaby. We reseal what we can. The ledger closes certain books." Eli's fingers curled into his palms. The curator's hand moved, indicating a cluster of darker, hotter cases. "You keep it. You ride the drift, until the world rethreads itself fully. We lose more than we have yet tallied." Jonas shifted beside him, weight forward, jaw tight. "And the third?" the curator said, voice softening around the word as if it tasted strange. "You do what we have spent our existence preventing." The word struck him harder than any warning had. "You take the lullaby," the curator continued, "and you compose with it. Not as a thief who borrows whole cloth, but as a maker who changes form. You choose a debt to pay that is yours, not inherited." Eli swallowed. His mouth was dry. "It does," the curator said, "unless someone names one so clearly that refusing it would cause a greater imbalance." Their gaze slid briefly toward Jonas. Jonas snorted quietly. The lullaby fluttered against Eli's ribs, half afraid, half eager. 100 unwritten lives thrummed against the vault glass around them, Eli said. Jonas reached into his pocket, fingers closing around something, then stepped closer and pressed a worn, triangular shape into Eli's palm. A guitar pick, edges frayed, logo rubbed away. "My first one," Jonas said. He closed Eli's fingers around it. "Consider it an anchor." The plastic was warm from Jonas's hand. Eli held it, felt the indentation from years of playing that never went anywhere. The lullaby curled around it, curious. He saw it then, as if a plaque had been held up in front of him. The version of his life he'd been carrying like contraband. Sold-out clubs with Rin, critics' lists, that one perfect, universe-affirming set they never played. The band that should have been, polished smooth by repetition, until it hardly resembled the real nights of missed cues and bad sound checks. "That's the one," he said, voice low. The curator watched him carefully. Eli raised his head. The vault's hum rose, pressing at his ears, waiting. "I give it up," he said. Each word felt like prying his own fingers off a ledge. "The fantasy of the brilliant career Rin and I were supposed to have." His throat burned. "Take that. Take every version of that." The sound in the vault shifted. Somewhere above them, the museum's chord bent, then began, slowly, to resolve into something new. The first thing he notices when they come back up from the vault is that the hallway light has a different buzz. It's a half step lower than he remembers, throatier. The fluorescent fixture over the staff corridor door flickers once, then steadies, as if a decision has been made and the building is exhaling. The lullaby thrummed in his chest like a second pulse on the way up. Now in the corridor's stale coffee and cleaner air, it settles into something more regular. Not quiet, never that, but measured, like a metronome backstage before the house lights go down. "Go home," the curator said at the vault threshold. Their voice strained, color of their eyes washed pale in the vault's teal glare. "Right, quickly." They did not follow him out of the alley. They stayed with their tuning forks in the humming dark. So Eli walks. The city at 4 a.m. is smeared and unfinished. Headlights drag white ribbons over wet asphalt. A bus sighs past, mostly empty. Somewhere, a bottle breaks and no one yells. Signals from a half-asleep world. Reality shivers at the edges as he cuts across the avenue toward his block. Storefront signs blur, then snap back into focus. For one heartbeat, the laundromat on the corner wears its old video rental marquee, red neon letters half blown. The next, it's washers and dryers again, humming in a 12/8 rhythm that the lullaby curls around and tests. "Not you," Eli mutters under his breath, to the song or to himself. In response, it tightens across his ribs like someone lacing their fingers through his spine. Not angry, expectant. His apartment door sticks the way it always has. For a terrifying second, the key slides into a smooth plate of metal where the lock should be, then catches. The door opens on his cramped studio, futon, milk crates, TV on a cheap stand. The layout jitters. The futon flickers between couch and mattress on the floor. The crate stack blurs from records to notebooks to nothing and back again. At the center of it all, his guitar leans in its usual corner, black finish scuffed, tone knob missing, E-string still broken. For one dizzy instant it's brand new, gleaming, unchipped, the kind of instrument he used to stare at through shop windows with Mara. But then it settles back into its honest damage. "This is it," Eli says aloud, because the air feels thin, and saying nothing seems like an invitation for erasure. His voice sounds different in the room, as if the walls are listening. He sits on the futon, the springs wheezing under his weight, and pulls the guitar into his lap. The lullaby rises to meet his fingers before he even touches the strings. For years, he has played around it, hummed after it, avoided it. 4 descending notes that were his entire childhood world. The sound of Mara's hand on his hair while trains went by. Now, when he lays his fingers on the fretboard, the melody unfolds like a map he's finally been given permission to read. The first note is as he remembers it, open, simple, like a door slightly ajar. The second goes somewhere new. He chases it, not with the frantic greed he felt when he freed the high school anthem, but with something closer to a conversation. The odder the Elia, like the echo in the atrium when no one else is there. He plays quietly at first, half afraid the museum will reach through the walls and slap his hands away. His right thumb stutters on the strings. Nothing smites him. The room doesn't fold. Instead, words begin to surface. Reluctant, like they've been waiting for him to stop pretending he's only an instrumentalist. Trains, doors that weren't there until you needed them. Coffee and citrus on someone's sleeve. A humming that's a promise and a threat. He writes about absence, but not like a wound he's licking for the 100th time. More like a space that has a shape because someone once filled it. Lines scrawl themselves across the page of a spiral notebook that, a month ago, didn't exist in his crate, but now is dog-eared and half full of crossed-out fragments. His handwriting jerks and slips. Every so often his pen stops on a word and the word fuzzes, refuses to land. Career, breakthrough, tour. The ledger plucking fantasy threads as he names them, unwinding the myth he offered. He keeps going, hours knocked together. The sky outside his thin curtains goes from black to bruise purple to something like morning. The lullaby yields verse and bridge, and somewhere in the middle 8 he hears Mara's laugh in the way the chords resolve. Not a recording, just the contour of it, the way she used to say his name when he botched a chord and tried to pretend it was intentional, when his fingers twitch toward some grandiose run that smells like teenage posters and glossy interviews. The notes slip away, like a dream he's decided not to chase. By the time he stops, his fingertips burn and the calluses feel newly earned. The song sits on the page, and in his head at once, part lullaby, part city noise, part the low, stubborn hope that dragged him through the alley door in the first place. Not immaculate, not genius. His. As he exhales, something in the air shifts. The elaborate daydream he's carried for years, sold-out tours with Rin, critical darlings after one perfect record, late-night shows where interviewers call him the one that got away and came back blazing unspools. He reaches for it out of habit and finds only a faint outline, like a poster taken down after too many summers in the sun. The specifics are gone. No venue names, no imaginary reviews. Just a vague sense that he once expected life to be louder than this. He waits for grief, for panic. What comes instead is an odd, clean ache, space where a ghost used to sit on his chest. Far below, or everywhere at once, the Museum of Unplayed Songs adjusts. In an omniscient corner of the atrium, 3 mid-level cases that once glowed with adolescent band swagger shiver, then dim. Their plaques would have LED to a cult favorite debut by a local 4-piece, would have been remembered as the definite breakup album of a decade, would have launched a world tour, and 2 public meltdowns flicker through half-sentences. Then they are blank glass and dust motes. Other cases on distant mezzanines brighten fractionally. The atrium's hum, which has been jagged and late echoing for days, collects itself into a steadier chord. Not the same as before Eli ever arrived. It carries a faint new interval, somewhere between sorrow and resolve. Jonas, on his break with his Walkman around his neck, notices one of his cassettes has gone silent on one side. A thin strip of brown tape, with no more band name, no more muffled teenage shout. He rewinds, presses play again. Hiss. Nothing. He feels the absence as a gentle pressure, like a hand on his shoulder turning him towards something else. "Okay," he says to the empty break room, and doesn't quite know why the word makes his eyes sting. Outside the museum, the city edits itself along quieter lines. Rin wakes up in her small, overstuffed apartment to a flood of notifications about a last-minute fill-in gig. Her calendar app is cleaner than it used to be. There is no recurring reminder about old band reunion, Ask Eli, Kiko looping every spring. The memory of waiting for Eli to finally come through as their savior songwriter has thinned into something simpler. They were a band, they were good sometimes, he left, she kept playing. Guilt she has carried like an extra instrument case, about stealing their shot by working harder, about getting on festival bills without him, feels lighter, like someone rearranged the strap so it no longer digs into the same sore spot. By late afternoon, Eli has showered, slept in fragments, and played the song through enough times that the chord changes sit under his fingers like a language he didn't know he still spoke. The lullaby is quieter now, braided into the new melody instead of pacing his ribcage. He stares at his phone for a long time. The text thread with Rin is short, mostly logistics and one aborted apology message he never sent. Somewhere in the erased corridors of his mind there used to be screenshots of imaginary conversations where she forgave him and begged him back for one last show in front of a stunned industry crowd. Those conversations are gone. His hands shake only a little as he types. "Got a new song. Need a quiet room. Can I swing by?" He watches the 3 dots appear, vanish, return. "Fine," she writes, 6 p.m. "Don't be late and don't be weird." He almost laughs. No promises, he tells the empty room, but the words are softer than the ones he used to use on himself. The laundromat's stairwell smells the same as ever, detergent and old steam, the metal railing slick with a film of humidity. Upstairs, the rehearsal space door bears a new layer of stickers over the old graffiti, local bands he hasn't heard of and one he recognizes from the almost anthem night. Rin opens before he can knock twice. Her hair is shorter than the last time, streaked with a color that might have been blue and purple in another timeline. There's a strap mark on her shoulder, from a bus that isn't currently in view, and a faint wrinkle between her brows that wasn't there in the old fantasy versions of this moment. "You look like shit," she says, taking him in. He holds up the guitar case, borrowed from a pawn shop, the latch slightly crooked. She steps aside. "Then come in." The room is smaller than he remembers, and somehow bigger. Same scuffed floor, same wall of mismatched amps, same faint scent of dust and hot circuitry. A new rug, a different bass leaning against the wall. No echo of the imaginary platinum records he once pictured lining this space. Eli sits on a folding chair, the metal cool through his jeans, and sets up without fanfare. Rin leans against the far wall, arms crossed, guard up but eyes sharp. "Okay," she says. He doesn't give a speech. There is no explanation that would make sense, and, besides, the museum has its invisible hand around his throat whenever he tries. What he has is this song, so he plays. The first notes come out rough. His fingers catch on the old scar at the 12th fret. Then the melody finds its line, the lullaby turning corners it never had a chance to take when it was just Mara's hush between train horns. He sings. The lyrics are plain. No mythologizing, a kid in a teal stairwell listening to someone hum through their own fear. A door in an alley that only appears when you're tired enough to try it. A job that turns out to be a debt, the way music can both hold you and hurt you. But the ache is there, threaded through rhyme and rhythm. When he stops, the amp buzz stays loud for a heartbeat, then fades. Rin's jaw works once, twice. "Okay," she says at last, very quietly. He swallows. "Still needs a middle 8, she adds, because she is who she is. Bridge feels like it's almost landing on something and then chickens out. She shakes her head once, like dislodging an argument she doesn't want. That's you. He lets the critique in, lets it land somewhere near pride instead of shame. So, she says, what do you want? Because if this is you asking to get the band back together, it's not. He cuts in, surprising both of them with how fast the words come. Something behind her eyes eases, like a string finally brought down to pitch. Good, she says. Then maybe we write, sometimes. Small stuff, no savior narratives. You bring me songs like this, we see if they stand up in front of people. He nods. A smile flashes across her face. Quick, real, gone. You're already late, she says, glancing at the clock. Again, play it once more before the kids get here. He plays. It holds. Later, after they've argued about chord voicings and she's scribbled alternative bridge ideas on a bent index card, he finds himself back in the alley behind the shuttered music store, almost without choosing to go there. The sky is dark again. Rain has started, light and needling, turning the pavement into a sheet of reflected sodium orange. The mural woman, with headphones for eyes, looks down on him through beadlets of water. The door in the wall is still there. Its outline glows faintly under his handless urgent than before, a background hum instead of a siren. You're quieter, he tells it.
That would be the point,
Says a voice from the threshold. The curator stands just inside, suit slightly rumpled, tuning forks at their belt chiming softly of their own accord. Their eyes are a muted, stormy color tonight. Eli asks. They consider. We are. Intact. Altered. A small nod toward his chest. The ledger accepted your offering. He thinks of the vanished fantasies, the cases dimming, Jonas's blank tape. Something almost like a smile ghosts across their mouth. Her record has stopped flickering. It remains a tragic entry. But where it once ended in a hard, thin line, there is now a coda. The word tastes weird, legal and musical at once. Yes, the curator says. Transformations instead of simple containment or theft. Their gaze sharpens. Do not mistake this for leniency. The cost remains. I know, Eli says. He feels the absence of the big, shining what-if like a missing tooth his tongue keeps finding. For the first time, the idea feels less like surrender and more like tuning. Others may ask for what you received, the curator continues, almost to themselves. We will not always grant it. They step back, leaving the doorway open. The hum from within is gentler now, woven with an interval he recognizes from the song he just played. You can still work here, they add. If you wish. There will always be floors to mop and ledgers to watch. He hears, in that, both a warning and an invitation. I'll be back, he says. The curator inclines their head. As Eli turns away, the alley feels less like an entrance to an underworld, and more like another side street in the city he's finally walking through, with his eyes open. He hums his new song under his breath, soft enough that only he can hear it. Far overhead, or beneath his feet, or coiled somewhere between heartbeats. The Museum of Unplayed Songs hums around its countless cases. In one of them, long ago and not yet, a young woman in a threadbare teal jacket rests her hand on a plaque and decides to steal a lullaby. Now, somewhere in that resonance, a different note rings. Not an unanswered question, but the first, imperfect bar of a song that does not plan to be forgotten. The lullaby inside him answers with a small, steady pulse, as if agreeing. He doesn't know what the next cost will be, or who will come to the door he's already opened wider than it was meant to go. But for the first time since Mara vanished, he feels something like forward, fragile, unfinished, humming just ahead of him as he walks into the ordinary night. And that's where we'll leave the museum tonight. Humming somewhere out of sight, its cases shifting softly in the dark. Thank you for walking with me through this quiet space between memories and possibilities. If you're ready for sleep, let your breathing deepen, and let the story dissolve into the background like a lullaby. Rest gently. You're safe. The night is yours. Good night.